Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're taking a look at GPU performance in Cyberpunk 2077. I probably don't need to say too much more than that before we jump into the blue bar graphs, but for those of you interested, I will go over a few quick details about the game, how we tested it, and the hardware used. But before any of that, today's video sponsor is ASUS in partnership with Scorptech to bring you the Blackout RTX 3080, the ultimate gaming PC. At the heart of this system is an 8-core, 16-thread Intel Core i7-10700KF CPU, boosting up to 5.1 GHz and unlocked on the ASUS TUF Z490 Plus Wi-Fi motherboard for maximum tuning potential. Then, tearing through all the latest games is the ASUS TUF Gaming RTX 3080, an amazing graphics card that we've already reviewed on the channel and given the seal of approval. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so obviously Cyberpunk 2077 has been highly anticipated and is easily the biggest release of the year. The game was announced 8 years ago now, back in May of 2012, and since then multiple teasers and trailers have been released, generating a great deal of hype. So, has the wait been worth it? Well, based on the Steam reviews that I've seen, I'd say the answer is yes. The game has received a massive number of mostly positive reviews, and with over 1 million concurrent players on Steam, that means it's already smashed Fallout 4's record for the most concurrent players for a single-player title, and when preloads went live, Steam saw its biggest bandwidth peak since PUBG, reaching 23.5 terabytes per second. So, Cyberpunk 2077 is massively popular, and it appears to be a huge success, both in terms of sales and the quality of the game. Therefore, we'll be dedicating a huge amount of time to checking this one out, and this first benchmark video will cover performance with all current and previous generation GPUs from AMD and Nvidia. Then tomorrow, Tim will be providing a detailed look at ray tracing and DLSS performance, as well as some image quality comparisons. Then, depending on demand, I'll take a look at performance with older GPUs from the Pascal, Maxwell, Vega, and Polaris generations. And I'll probably also put together a CPU benchmark as well. So, plenty more content to come. Now, for the GPU testing, I'm using version 1.0.3, so this isn't a performance preview, rather we waited for the day one patch before we began testing. The game doesn't feature a built-in benchmark, which is fine as we typically prefer to measure in-game performance, so for this one we're testing Little China using the Street Kid life path. And this means testing takes place in a very demanding section of the game, in the city, while it's raining. As for quality settings, I've tested using both the medium and ultra quality presets at 1080p, 1440p and 4K with 25 current and previous generation GPUs, and please note the game was reset when changing the quality presets. So in order to create this video, I've made almost 500 benchmark runs, each lasting 60 seconds each. Therefore, I've basically not slept since the game was released. Have to say though, Cyberpunk 2077 has been an absolute pleasure to test. In all of these runs, the game only crashed the desktop a single time, which is highly stable for a new game, especially one that I've thrown 25 different graphics cards at. It's also fast to load, the menu system is extremely good, and switching between resolutions is a breeze. If only all games were this well polished. Finally, all testing was conducted using the Ryzen 9 5950X with 32GB of DDR4 3200CL14 memory on the MSI X570 Unify motherboard. The exact model for the graphics card used to represent the GPU can be found in the video description, and of course I have used the latest display drivers available from AMD and Nvidia. Just lastly, we created a poll asking all of you what the minimum accepted sustained frame rate for you in a game like Cyberpunk 2077 with stunning visuals is, and the answer was an overwhelming 60 FPS or better, with just 7% of the over 60k people who voted finding 45 FPS acceptable and a mere 4% willing to settle on a console like 30 FPS experience. So with that in mind, let's get into the results. Starting with the 1080p Ultra results, we see that for that desired 60 FPS experience, you require a Radeon VII, RX 5700 XT, or a GeForce RTX 2070, and even then we're talking about almost 60 FPS on average, with 1% lows below 50 FPS. So for a more consistent 60 FPS experience, you'll want an RTX 2080 Super, 3060 Ti, or from AMD, the new Radeon RX 6800. If you're happy with 40 to 50 FPS on average, which we know most people aren't based on our poll results, but if you are, anything from the GTX 1660 Ti up to the RX 5700 will work. Obviously, Cyberpunk 2077 is extremely demanding as it's a visually impressive open world game, so the numbers you see here aren't unexpected, and of course we'll look at performance using the medium quality preset soon. Before we move on to the 1440p results though, it's interesting to note that although Cyberpunk 2077 is an Nvidia sponsored title and has been highly optimized to take advantage of Nvidia's hardware, at least the PC version has, the game still runs very well using Radeon GPUs, which isn't something I was necessarily expecting to find, at least not at launch. The Radeon RX 5700 XT, for example, is able to edge out the RTX 2070 and 2060 Super. And while it has been matching or beating the 2070 Super in most of the newer AAA titles, the fact that it still beats its main competitor, being the similarly priced 2060 Super, is a good result. The RX 6800 also beat the RTX 3070 by a 9% margin, and although it does cost 16% more at MSRP, that's still a good result in an Nvidia sponsored title. We're also seeing a situation at 1080p where the 6800 XT beats the RTX 3080. Now, for those of you hoping to play Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p with the visual quality settings cranked right up, while also achieving 60 FPS, you want to make sure that you have at least a Radeon RX 6800, and admittedly in today's market that's not an easy product to find, as is the case with all GPUs towards the top of this graph. Here the 6800 XT does slip just behind the RTX 3080 as it was just 5% slower, which is a great result for the Red team. The new 6900 XT was able to match the 3080, though like the 3090 it's a terrible value product that you absolutely shouldn't buy. Speaking of the 3090, it was 11% faster than the 3080, which is a pretty typical performance uplift at this resolution, and it meant Nvidia's flagship gaming graphics card was good for 81 FPS on average. For those of you comfortable with a 40 to 50 FPS experience, the new GeForce RTX 3060 Ti will suffice, or the previous generation flagship RTX 2080 Ti. From AMD, you'll need a Radeon VII for just 40 FPS on average, while the 5700 XT dropped down to 36 FPS. Then at 4K, as you'd probably guess by now, a 60 FPS experience using the ultra quality settings simply isn't possible right now, as the RTX 3090 was good for just 44 FPS on average. This is how I played the game initially, and while it did look very visually stunning, aiming wasn't exactly a fun experience in my opinion. For me, this frame rate it really isn't playable, at least not to a degree where I find myself enjoying the game. Of course, you can enable DLSS for a better experience, and as I said, we'll be covering that in a lot more detail in tomorrow's video. Unfortunately, AMD is yet to release their DLSS-like technology, so short of downscaling with image sharpening, there's really no way to get that 4K image quality with playable frame rates using a Radeon GPU. Now, before we move into the medium quality testing, here's a quick look at part of the benchmark pass comparing image quality between the medium and ultra quality presets at 4K using the RTX 3090. I'll be honest though, I can't really tell that much of a difference. There are other areas of the game where Ultra offers slightly better shadow quality and lighting effects, but it is subtle for the most part, and you really have to be looking for the difference. But I've stuck to showing you the benchmark pass, as this is obviously highly relevant to the numbers being shown. In short though, you're looking at around a 40% performance uplift with the medium preset for a very small downgrade in visual quality, at least in my opinion. Okay, so using the medium quality preset at 1080p, we see that for 60 FPS you can get away with a GTX 1660 Ti or a Radeon RX 5600 XT, which is a surprisingly low requirement, though we are only at 1080p. Still, under these conditions, you can get over 40 FPS with a GTX 1650 Super or 5500 XT, both of which are very underwhelming previous generation budget GPUs. The 5700 XT performed better relative to the GeForce competition using these dialed down quality settings. This time it's found sitting directly between the 2060 Super and 2070 Super. The newer RTX 3060 Ti and RX 6800 were faster again as you'd expect, pushing well over 100 FPS, getting up around 120 to 125 FPS. For me personally, I find 90 FPS ideal, input feels good at that frame rate, so the 5700 XT worked well enough for me. Point is though, with these dialed down but still very visually impressive quality settings, the game plays very well at 1080p on rather modest hardware. Now, moving to 1440p means gamers will require at least an RTX 2070 Super for 60 FPS with the medium quality settings. The Radeon VII and 5700 XT fall just short of that, though passable for someone after a 60 FPS experience. The newer RTX 3060 Ti offered a much better experience, though having said that, the gains over the previous generation $400 part, the 2060 Super, are a bit disappointing. In my RTX 3060 Ti review, I found it was on average 50% faster than the 2060 Super, yet here it's just 34% faster, and that would have been one of the weakest gains we saw in our review covering 18 new and popular titles. The RX 6800 did a little better relative to the card it's replacing, the 5700 XT, offering 56% more performance, and in our day one review featuring 18 games, it was on average 52% faster. Then finally at 4K, it's possible to push up over 60 FPS and even achieve close to a 60 FPS 1% low when using an RTX 3090. The RTX 3080 was also good for 60 FPS on average, as was the Radeon RX 6900 XT, while the 6800 XT managed just over 50 FPS. Then for the RTX 3070 and slower GPUs, I'd recommend dialing the resolution back to 1440p for a much smoother gaming experience. Just lastly, here's a look at preset scaling performance with the 6800 XT and RTX 3080 at 1440p. Both saw a 42% performance uplift when going from ultra to medium, and as we just saw when looking at a wide range of GPUs, that kind of performance uplift makes a huge difference to lower end models. The visual difference between high and ultra is very minimal, at least in the sections of the game that I compared them. So most of you with high-end GPUs should probably just dial it back a notch, which is almost always the case. Medium though seems like a great compromise, and then you have low, which is noticeably worse than medium, but I have to say the game still does look very good. So for those of you with a lower end graphics card, you're still in for a real treat, and again, this is something I could benchmark with older GPUs next week if there is enough interest. So that's how Cyberpunk 2077 performs on current and previous generation GPUs. And I've got to say, given how visually breathtaking this game is, the performance is easily justified, especially for an open world title, and it is well worth remembering that this is an open world title, it's not a linear shooter, so yeah, given what we're seeing here, very impressive stuff. And really, if you are willing to compromise ever so slightly on the visuals and go down to the medium quality preset, then the game becomes very playable on surprisingly affordable previous generation hardware like the Radeon RX 5700 XT or the GeForce RTX 2070 for example. And yeah, those are still fairly high-end GPUs, but $400 for the 5700 XT is very reasonable given what we're seeing here. Of course, the 3060 Ti is what you'd buy now, and 71 FPS at 1440p with the medium quality settings was a great experience. Again, Tim will be looking at how the 3060 Ti handles ray tracing with and without DLSS in tomorrow's video, along with many more GPUs. So we'll cover all of that there. Something else that I'm really keen to look at is CPU performance, as this game appears to be very CPU demanding. For example, I saw up to 40% utilization with a 16-core 32-thread Ryzen 9 5950X, and out of interest, I quickly tried the 6-core 12-thread Ryzen 5 3600, as it's a very popular processor. I am happy to report the game was very smooth with the 3600, though utilization was high with physical core utilization up around 80%. RAM usage isn't all that extreme, at least when not constrained by VRAM, you're looking at around 7 to 8 GB of system memory being used by the game. So that's very reasonable, and it means you should be in for a smooth experience with a 16 GB memory kit. And the section that I tested saw VRAM usage peak at 6.5 GB at 1080p, 7 GB at 1440p, and 8 GB at 4K, though you can expect those figures to increase quite a bit with ray tracing enabled. Overall, Cyberpunk 2077 is a great-looking next-generation game that appears to scale very well to suit a wide range of hardware. That said, if you're unhappy with the performance your older GPU is delivering, then hopefully this video was helpful in steering you towards your next upgrade. Presumably sometime next year when hopefully we'll actually be able to buy graphics cards again. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. Again, hope you guys appreciated all the testing that went into this one, and apologies to those of you who are a bit disappointed that we didn't do our usual 40-50 GPU benchmark. As I said, probably do a follow-up video to include that. It's been a pretty crazy past 3 months, so I haven't had the energy levels I would normally have to throw at a content piece like this, so I thought we'd break it up, and if there's enough demand, all that extra testing can follow, because it's basically twice the testing I did in this video. And as I said, it's about 500 benchmark runs just to make the content you see here. And of course, Tim will have a video tomorrow covering ray tracing, DLSS, all that stuff. So if you're interested in more Cyberpunk content, then make sure you are subscribed to the Hardware Unboxed channel. And yeah, give this video a like if you can. Other than that, we do have Patreon and Floatplane if you'd like to become a Hardware Unboxed community member. That gives you access to our exclusive live streams and Discord chat. So Tim and I will be doing a live stream together later this month. We talk about a lot of interesting things. We have some very interesting behind the scenes stuff to discuss this month, which I'm sure would definitely interest you if you're interested in this type of stuff. Discord chat, behind the scenes videos, Q&As, heaps of interesting stuff. So if you're interested, check it out. Links are in the video description. If not, perfectly fine. And I would like to just thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.